She only asked me to take off my shoes, but somehow, that single rule pulled me into the warmest, most unexpected connection of my life. The evening I first stepped into her building, the rain hadn't stopped for hours. It was the kind of rain that feels heavy on your shoulders, dampening more than just clothes. It dampens thoughts, makes them slower, softer. My shoes left faint marks on the polished hallway floor as I carried 2 boxes, my jacket clinging to my skin. I was tired, distracted, and not really expecting to meet anyone at that hour. Then her door opened. She stood there, early 40s, hair swept back in a loose bun, wearing a soft cream sweater and dark lounge pants, barefoot on the smooth wooden floor. There was nothing staged about her. Her presence was calm, composed, yet somehow magnetic in its simplicity. For a moment, the warm light behind her framed her figure, and I forgot to breathe. Her eyes went first to the floor, then up to me, and her lips parted with a small, polite smile. "No shoes inside, please," she said. Her voice wasn't stern. It was more like a gentle rule, one that belonged to the house, not just to her. I blinked, caught off guard, juggling the boxes in my hands. Maybe it was the long day, maybe the way her eyes lingered a second too long on mine, but I let a small, teasing smile slip out. "Fine," I said, trying to sound light. "I'll take off everything if that's what it takes." For a second, I thought I'd overstepped. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, and there was a flicker, surprise, a hint of something unreadable. But then it passed, replaced by the faintest shake of her head, and a quiet, restrained laugh. Not a full laugh, more like the sound of someone remembering how to. "Shoes will do," she replied, stepping aside, one hand brushing the doorframe as if to guide me in without words. The warmth of her apartment contrasted sharply with the rain-soaked chill I carried in. The scent hit me first, something subtle, like dried lavender and the faint spice of tea leaves. A vase of white lilies sat near the entryway, their petals just beginning to curl at the edges. I slipped my shoes off slowly, feeling the cool wood under my socks, and when I glanced up, I caught her watching me. Not staring, just observing, like she wanted to know what kind of tenant I would be, what kind of person carried themselves with that mix of awkwardness and quiet confidence. There was a pause, one of those small, delicate pauses where something could begin, even if either of you knows it yet. She gestured toward the hallway. "Your room is the second on the left. If you need anything, just knock." Her tone was simple, but her eyes lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary before she turned away, the soft pad of her bare feet fading into the living room. That was our beginning, a doorway, a rule, and a moment suspended in the warmth between 2 strangers. The first week passed quietly, the way a new place often does when you're still figuring out how your footsteps sound against unfamiliar floors. The boxes were mostly empty now, stacked in the corner of my small room, but the air still smelled faintly of cardboard and newness. I hadn't seen much of her since that first night, just glimpses in the hallway, polite nods, a brief, "good morning," exchanged between closed doors. She kept to herself, and I respected that. There was a rhythm to her home, one I didn't yet belong to, soft music playing somewhere in the afternoons, the occasional low hum of a kettle, a door closing gently rather than with force. That evening, as I wrestled with the last stubborn bit of unpacking, a tangle of wires and books that refused to organize themselves, a light knock sounded against my door. It was almost tentative, as if she wasn't sure whether to interrupt. When I opened it, there she stood, a tray balanced carefully in her hands, a simple porcelain teapot, 2 cups, and a small plate of biscuits that looked more handmade than bought. Her hair was slightly damp, falling in loose strands against her cheeks, and I caught a faint hint of citrus, maybe her shampoo. "I thought you might need a break," she said, her voice carrying that calm steadiness I was beginning to associate with her. "Unpacking can be a bit of a battle." I smiled, rubbing the back of my neck. "You have no idea. Come in." She hesitated for half a second, then stepped inside, placing the tray on the low table. As she handed me a cup, our fingers touched, just briefly, enough for the warmth of her skin to register against mine. It was a fleeting, ordinary thing, but it lingered in the air like a trace of something unspoken. The tea smelled faintly of mint and honey, steam curling lazily between us. I noticed, not for the first time, the small details about her, how her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, how a faint silver bracelet glinted against her wrist when she poured. There was a quiet grace in the way she moved, deliberate but never rigid. "Thank you," I said, "for this, and for being patient with me moving in. I'm sure it's a bit disruptive." She shook her head lightly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "It's nice, having someone here. The house has been a little too quiet lately." Her gaze drifted to the half-unpacked books, then back to me. It wasn't a probing look, more like she was quietly mapping the space between us, deciding how close to stand without making it uncomfortable. For a few minutes, we sipped our tea in easy silence. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper against the windows. There was no rush, no need to fill the air with chatter. Just the warmth of the cup in my hands, the faint citrus scent of her hair, and the awareness that her presence made the room feel less empty. The third week felt quieter than the first two, not in a lonely way, but in that settling kind of silence a new home eventually offers. I was beginning to find my rhythm: work during the day, a book or a late walk at night. She and I crossed paths often enough to exchange polite words, a shared smile in the hallway, the soft sound of her saying, "Good night," when I passed her door. There was still a distance between us, but it had softened into something comfortable. Then came the storm. It was a Thursday evening when the wind picked up, rattling the windows like impatient fingers. Rain slammed against the glass in long, uneven bursts, and not long after, the power went out. One moment I was halfway through boiling pasta, the next, the apartment was swallowed in darkness, the quiet replaced by the hum of rain and the distant groan of thunder. I stood in the kitchen, unsure if I should just wait it out, when her voice called softly from the living room. "You okay in there?" Her silhouette appeared in the glow of a single candle. She held another in her hand, its flame bending slightly as she stepped closer. The dim light made her features softer, more intimate somehow. The shadows played along her cheekbones, the curve of her jaw. "I figured you might not want to sit alone in the dark," she said, tilting her head toward the couch. I followed her into the living room, and together we set the candles down on the low table. Their light pooled gently between us, flickering across the walls. She unfolded a blanket, placing it over the couch, and with a casual motion, gestured for me to sit. We ended up side by side, not quite touching, but close enough that the shared warmth of the blanket stretched across both our knees. The storm outside drummed against the windows, a steady, restless heartbeat. She asked about my work, and I asked about her favorite spots in the neighborhood. Slowly, the conversation slipped into quieter waters: books we'd both read, music we'd grown up with. Every now and then, our shoulders brushed as we shifted slightly to face each other. Each touch was accidental, yet neither of us moved away. The scent of melting wax mixed with something faint and warm, maybe her skin, maybe the tea she'd poured earlier and forgotten on the table. Her laughter came easier in the candlelight, soft and low, like a memory returning after a long absence. At one point I turned my head and found her watching me. Not staring, just looking, as if trying to see past the surface. There was no hurry in her gaze, no demand. Just quiet presence. For that brief hour, the storm outside faded into the background, and the darkness of the apartment felt less like an inconvenience, and more like an excuse, to sit close, to listen, to simply share the night without needing anything more. It was past midnight when I found her again. The apartment had gone still, no hum of television, no gentle footsteps across the wooden floors. I'd been sitting at my desk, trying to finish a late email, when I heard the faint clink of glass from the kitchen. I hesitated at first, it wasn't my place to intrude. But something about the sound, soft yet restless, drew me out of my room. She was there, leaning against the counter, her hair untied and falling over one shoulder. A glass of water sat half-finished beside her. She didn't startle when she saw me, just glanced up with a tired half-smile, the kind people wear when they're already lost in thought. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass. Not tonight. Some nights are like that, too many old thoughts finding their way back in. I stepped closer, barefoot against the cool tiles. Want to talk about it? For a moment, I thought she'd turn away, change the subject. But something softened in her expression. Maybe the hour, maybe the quietness of the kitchen made it easier to let words out. She told me, in slow fragments, about a relationship that had ended 2 years ago, not bitterly, just quietly, like a flame that had run out of air. About the way silence can linger in a home when someone leaves, how it starts to echo if you don't fill it with something new. As she spoke, her eyes stayed fixed on the countertop, as though looking at me would make it harder to finish. Her voice didn't break, but it carried a weight, a kind of gentle ache that comes from carrying disappointment too long without letting anyone hold part of it. I didn't try to fix it. I just listened, my hands resting against the counter near hers. And when her fingers paused, still circling the rim of the glass, I let mine drift a little closer, resting lightly against her forearm. It was the smallest gesture, but her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, she didn't move. Her skin was cool, almost chilled from the night air, but the pulse beneath was steady. She didn't pull away. That must have been hard, I said quietly. She nodded once, her shoulders rising and falling with a slow exhale. You get used to the quiet. But some nights, you remember it wasn't always this way. We stood there for a while, no need to fill the space with anything louder than that. The fridge hummed softly beside us, the tiles cool underfoot, the kitchen bathed in the faint orange glow of the street lamp outside. Eventually, she straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Thanks for listening, she murmured. And just like that, the moment passed, but it left a trace behind, a thread of trust quietly tying 2 nights together. The weather had been unkind all week, wind pushing rain against the streets in crooked lines, nights settling in earlier than they should. That evening, I came back later than usual, jacket heavy with rain, hair dripping against my forehead. I fumbled with the keys, trying not to track too much water in as I pushed the door shut behind me. She was in the living room, seated near the window with a book in hand, legs tucked beneath her. The lamp cast a warm halo around her, and for a moment she didn't notice me. When she finally looked up, her brows softened. You're soaked, she said, setting the book aside and standing. Wait there. Before I could answer, she disappeared down the hallway, returning with a thick towel draped over her arm and a mug of something steaming in her hand. You'll catch a cold like that, she said, handing me the towel first. I started drying my hair, the rough cotton drawing the chill away, and I murmured something about being fine, about how I should have brought an umbrella. She didn't scold, only shook her head lightly and set the mug on the table beside me. Sit for a minute, she said. You're still shivering. I sank into the couch, towel draped around my shoulders, the faint scent of her cardigan brushing past as she moved closer. The tea smelled faintly of ginger and lemon. As I rubbed at my hair, a loose strand fell across my forehead. I must have looked a mess, water clinging to my lashes, my fingers clumsy with the cold. And that's when it happened. She stepped closer, one hand lifting as if without thinking, her fingers brushing that damp strand away. Just a small, almost practical gesture, but it lingered, her fingertips tracing the line of my forehead, pausing just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin against the chill of mine. I looked up. For a heartbeat, either of us moved. The air between us felt heavy, not with discomfort, but with something unspoken, a pause that held more than words could. Her eyes softened, and I saw it there, the same hesitation I felt. The line between what was polite and what was personal. Better, she whispered, almost to herself, and let her hand fall back. The moment broke gently, like a ripple fading on still water. She sat beside me, not too close, but close enough that the scent of rain on my jacket mingled with the warmth of her cardigan. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms, and for the rest of that evening, either of us spoke about the storm outside, or the one that had just quietly passed between us. It had been building quietly, in the pauses between conversations, in the way her gaze lingered when she thought I wasn't looking, in the warmth of those evenings shared under the same roof. Yet, with each passing day, so did the weight of unspoken questions. That night, the air felt thick, not from the weather, but from something subtler. I had just returned from the corner store with a bag of groceries when I found her in the hallway, arms crossed, as though she had been waiting. "We should talk," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness beneath it. I set the bag on the counter, unsure where this was heading. "All right," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, fingers brushing her forearm the way they often did when she was thinking. "It's about us. This," she gestured vaguely between us. "Whatever it is that's starting to happen." There it was, spoken finally. "I'm your landlady," she continued. "People notice things. Neighbors talk. It's not simple." Her words weren't sharp, they were careful, as though she wasn't trying to push me away but to protect something. Maybe herself, maybe me. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough so she could hear the steadiness in my voice. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I just like being here. I like being around you." She looked at me then, properly looked, and for the first time, I saw the conflict in her eyes, the pull between what she felt and what she thought she should do. "You're young," she whispered. "People will think, let them," I said softly. The room went quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed through the wet street, its headlights streaking across the window. Her hand hovered near the doorknob, as if she might leave, retreat back to the safety of her room. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed, her breath slow and uneven. I took a step closer, enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her presence, enough that the air between us felt like a held breath. "I don't want to make your life harder," I murmured. "But I also don't want to pretend this isn't here." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, her shoulders eased. She let go of the doorknob and turned toward me. And in that fragile pause, we found something in between. Not a kiss, not yet, just a quiet, hesitant hug. Her cheek rested near my collarbone, her arms slipping lightly around my sides. I didn't hold her too tightly, only enough for her to feel that I wasn't going anywhere. Her heartbeat was steady against my chest, and mine felt loud in the hush of that small kitchen. When she finally stepped back, her eyes searched mine, as though both relieved and more unsure than ever. But she didn't say, "Stop." Not this time. Morning came slowly that day, the kind where light doesn't rush in but creeps across the room in quiet layers. I woke earlier than usual, drawn by the faint scent of coffee drifting down the hallway. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving the world outside glistening and still. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was already there, barefoot, leaning against the counter, a mug in her hands. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling around her face, and the sunlight caught them like threads of gold. For a moment, neither of us said anything. There was no awkwardness now, just a calm that felt new and strangely steady. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, reaching for the bread. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Actually, I slept better than I have in weeks. Thought I'd make coffee before the day starts running away again." I began cracking eggs into a bowl, the sound of shells tapping against the counter breaking the silence in soft, familiar beats. She watched me move around the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read, part amusement, part curiosity, as though seeing me there felt at once normal and still a little surprising. "You didn't have to," she said, gesturing at the stove. "I wanted to," I replied simply. "Feels like the least I can do after all your tea and towels." That earned a quiet laugh, a real one this time, unguarded, the kind that softened the edges of the morning. As the toast browned and the eggs sizzled, she stepped closer, resting her mug on the counter beside me. Her hand settled near mine, not touching at first, just close enough that the warmth of her fingers brushed the side of my palm when I moved. "You know," she said softly, eyes on the window. "This wasn't what I expected when I said no shoes in the house." I smiled. "Neither did I. But I'm glad it happened." There was no tension now, no storm waiting to break, only the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it didn't need to be named yet. It just needed to be real. She nudged my foot lightly with hers, a small, playful gesture that said more than words could. I placed my hand over hers on the countertop, not gripping, just resting, an open promise rather than a claim. Outside, the city stirred awake, a bicycle bell in the distance, a shutter opening across the street, the day waiting at the edge of the quiet. We ate together at the small kitchen table, the sunlight catching her profile in warm lines. No grand declarations, no sudden rush. Just two people sharing breakfast, the memory of rain still in the air, and the beginning of something that felt like it might last, not because it burned brightly, but because it had been built slowly, carefully, like the first steps across a familiar floor.